Over my last couple of videos covering PlayStation 1 Hidden Gems, I covered games that went underappreciated due to their abstract or experimental design. For this video I thought I'd cover 5 games that fell under the radar. They're a little more conventional. I can't really say why any of these games went unnoticed, just that they don't receive as much love as they deserve. Without any further ado, Sled Storm. If it weren't for the draw distance, Sled Storm could easily pass for a PS2 game. The detailed tracks you form in the snow, how your vehicle's suspension reacts to bumps in the terrain, the weather effects, and just how smoothly the game runs with all this going on is phenomenal. It's not as though Sled Storm was the first game to feature any of these elements, but no other game pulled it off as convincingly. Graphically, Sled Storm is to the PS1 what Wave Race was to the N64. Just as that game wasn't the first to feature rippling water or surface reflections, they were executed so excellently that no other game from that generation could compete. Sled Storm is that, but with snow effects and off-road racing mechanics. Compare this to games like Cool Borders 4 or MTV Snowboarding, which both released the same year as Sled Storm, and the gulf between these games are apparent. There wouldn't be a snow-based sports title as compelling on a Sony console until SSX would come out, which happened to be a year later, but you get the point. Silent Bomber. I never thought I'd say this, but imagine Bomberman Act Zero but good. In Silent Bomber, your primary attack against enemies is to drop bombs behind you and detonate. This takes place in a gritty science fiction setting, wherein the story frequently suggests that the protagonist only exists to kill. Bizarrely, this is exactly what Hudson Soft would attempt 7 years later when rebooting the Bomberman franchise. Obviously I'm exaggerating, Silent Bomber isn't really that similar to Bomberman, besides the whole dropping bombs part. Otherwise the detonator and ability to stack bombs for a more powerful blast completely changes the dynamic of gameplay, and makes the game more strategic rather than Bomberman's characteristic immediate arcade action. This more strategic approach is aided by the story, which contextualizes events and justifies the game's relatively slower pace. And to be honest, I've dwelled so much on Bomberman as otherwise there's not really a solid comparison for Silent Bomber. Its central bomb dropping and detonating mechanic is so unique that it's difficult to properly convey how it feels to play this game. Though due to the simplicity and possible strategic capabilities of this core mechanic, Silent Bomber is easy to pick up and play just as it's enjoyable to fully master. I would highly recommend you give it a try. Toy Story 2 – Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. Maybe not a hidden gem, but definitely a forgotten game, and one that isn't brought up nearly enough in discussions of the best licensed games, particularly in terms of movie adaptations. Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue is a really excellent conversion of the movie's plot into a video game. Each level corresponds with a notable scene in the film. The scene is contextualized with a brief but informative segment taken directly from the movie. Each location is like a large playground with various Super Mario 64 style objectives to unlock the game's equivalent to a star, and often objectives tie into the events from the film, or just the novelty of being the size of a toy. The sense of scale and wonderment of traversing a giant world is fantastically realised in this game, and how you move around the world is informed by your small size. This game is definitely in the upper echelon of licensed games, and a real standout 3D platformer from this era. Speed Punks. Though today the kart racing genre is most certainly dominated by Nintendo with Mario Kart, there was a time when other companies attempted to nudge their way into that market. One of the more forgotten examples is Speed Punks, an incredibly bubbly and vibrant racing game. There's a very charming bounce to your character as he speeds along the tracks, and the tracks have very summery and inviting theming. The game looks as though it could be an adaptation of a Saturday morning cartoon. It's got that kind of nostalgic and energetic tone. The cornering is rather loose, and the game lacks the drifting controls which adds depth to a game like Mario Kart. But Speed Punks fills a niche on the PS1 for simple cartoon racing. An interesting side note is that the most recent game of Funcom, Speed Punks' developer, is the survival multiplayer game, Conan Exiles. Jumping Flash. This is a very early first-person 3D platformer by Exact, who would go on to produce the excellent Ghost in the Shell PlayStation game. Exact had developed the first ever 3D platformer for their X68000 in 1994 called Geograph Seal. And Jumping Flash is a continuation of that game with very similar HUD elements, objectives, and aesthetics. Geograph Seal was effectively a proof of concept, though technically it was the first 3D platformer. Jumping Flash is the first that feels like a legitimate game. There are power-ups, bosses at the end of worlds, levels feature elaborate theming, the player character has a unique design which informs how the game is played. You play as a robotic rabbit, and jumping is your most prominent movement tool. The levels are designed with verticality in mind. When Super Mario 64 came out a year later, pretty much all 3D platformers would imitate that control style, so consequently how Jumping Flash plays can feel antiquated. Big Zack designed the levels and combat with the controls in mind, so within the context of this game, Jumping Flash's somewhat sluggish tank controls really work. It's fascinating how with Jumping Flash and Ghost in the Shell, Zack would pioneer and refine such a unique control scheme for a 3D platformer, and no other game would imitate them. The result are two wonderful games that are unfortunately rather difficult to get into, but really worth giving a try. Thank you for watching. Be sure to recommend more PS1 Hidden Gems down below. Consider liking this video to show your support, and subscribing if you want to see more content like this in the future. Have a nice day. Peace.